In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill.
Silent Hill 2 is regarded by many as the greatest horror video game of all time. With the original being released back in 2001, it is still talked about now with the highest of praise. The Silent Hill franchise as a whole though has somewhat fallen off after its 4 original games, with the series being in a limbo state for a while now. As prior to 2024, the last game we got from this series was in 2012, with it being Silent Hill Downpour and Book of Memories, and neither game was received well at all. But in October 2022, a massive announcement was made as the most critically praised game in the franchise was being remade. The remake of Silent Hill 2 though was one that had many people skeptical in the build-up to it. And there were a multitude of reasons why, from people simply not believing a remake could hold up to the original in any way, not having faith in Bloober Team as prior to this they really didn't have the best track record with horror games. And now they were taking on the magnum opus of the genre. And lastly, they were just worried that they were going to try and modernize it too much where the charm and atmosphere of the original game is gone. But to the surprise of many, Bloober Team knocked it out of the park. Silent Hill 2 Remake was a massive success and was receiving the highest of scores imaginable. I'm someone who never played the original, was never exposed to it in any way. All I knew about it was that it had a lot of fog. So I was going into this game completely blind and holding no bias or knowledge to the original. And I had high expectations for obvious reasons. Suffice to say, those expectations were met with an unbelievable experience of a world and story that took me on an unforgettable journey. Before we really get into things, if you guys enjoyed this video, it would mean a lot if you could like, comment, and subscribe as we are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. There will be spoilers throughout this video, so save this for later if you don't want to be spoiled. With that being said, let's jump right into it. When I booted up this game for the very first time, there was something that stood out to me very quickly that I knew was going to be the highlight of this remake, and that was its atmosphere, which many people were worried about leading up to its release. The original Silent Hill 2 is so well known for its dreamlike feeling, constantly making you feel very unsettled and isolated throughout. Once I saw that fog for the first time and realized I could only see about 5 feet in front of me, I knew this atmosphere was going to screw with me mentally throughout my whole playthrough. And it did. I really do enjoy horror games, but oh my gosh, they stress me out so much. And for some reason with Silent Hill 2, I got immersed so easily that I felt like I was in the game. There were times where I had to look away from the screen and just interact with the real world to remember that the game is fake. But I think that is an unbelievable feat to accomplish. I got so glued and immersed into the world very quickly. There was not a single section of this entire story that I thought the atmosphere was weak or not as good as other sections. Constantly throughout my playthrough, the atmosphere was the thing that stood out to me the most. We had the South Vale streets with all the fog, the apartments, the hospital, the prison, the labyrinth, the hotel, and the otherworld sections of those places. Each one was so well designed and had its own unique feeling. The atmosphere was arguably the highlight of this entire game for me. I still think about it now, and it's been a few weeks since I beat it. The world of Silent Hill 2 is just so beautifully crafted. Another thing that enhances that atmosphere is its sound design. I played this game on the PS5, and with the DualSense controller there were sounds that came from it. Like whenever you got close to a creature, your controller would make more and more noises, which added a layer of immersion to the game. And especially since for the most part of the story there aren't many noises, so when there are some they stand out. One last thing that I'll touch on with its atmosphere is the story. The way they handle the narrative throughout the story plays into the setting and feeling of this game. One of the biggest narrative points, well, probably the biggest, is the mental state that James is in throughout. He is haunted by his past, he's confused, lost, and the environment around him represents that. The decaying area, eerie silence, the fog, it all ties into the emotional and mental state that James is in at that point in time. Your mental state affects what you see in Silent Hill. The other two characters we can point this towards is Angela and Eddie. Angela experiences this fiery, hellish environment, which is confirmed when she says it's always been like this when we see the fire as well. And for Eddie, he is constantly dealing with his paranoia and thinks people are making fun of him. And we also always see his breath when he talks to us, but it's not cold, and his breath is the only one that we can see. Again, pushing the idea that he sees his own Silent Hill. The town of Silent Hill is very much a mirror. You cross paths with both of these characters multiple times throughout the story, but it never really feels like you're experiencing the same thing that they are. It really did feel like you guys were in different worlds. What I truly love about Silent Hill 2's atmosphere is how it feels dead. Many horror games really try to play with the jump scares and keeping you on your toes. But here the world feels not alive, you feel isolated. There really aren't too many noises throughout, so when you do hear a creature or a noise, it stands out. Again, it reflects the mental state that James is in, and I think that was such an amazing direction and decision to go down in terms of the environment. Silent Hill 2 really has one of the best atmospheres I think I have ever seen. Moving into the next topic of this video though that I want to talk about, we have the gameplay. Now, in a game like Silent Hill 2, the gameplay is to me something that is always slightly second fiddle. When a game's focus is on its story and atmosphere, I can handle a relatively average gameplay system, maybe even a bad one in some cases. And for me, Silent Hill 2 falls into that average area. And average is not a bad thing at all in this situation. It's average in the way that it does what it needs to. Like, I'm not out here praising it because there really isn't much to praise, but it's the farthest thing from being an issue for me. The gameplay boils down to hitting enemies with a pipe or shooting them down with either your handgun, shotgun, or hunting rifle. It's basic, but that's all that is needed in this game. I'm happy that they were able to create a gameplay loop that never once held back the top tier elements of everything else. That is what needs to be done in these scenarios when a part of your game is so good and other elements aren't the main selling point. You have to make sure it doesn't drag the game down. And the gameplay here does not drag down any aspect of the story. Even something like the boss fights, which was something I was potentially worried about, were handled well. Surprisingly, I thought most of them were great. It wasn't even the gameplay that made them good, it was the build up to a fight or the environment that you're in, and sometimes the creature was just really well designed too. They surprisingly made good boss fights. Cause in games like this, when the gameplay system is very minimal, sometimes these boss fights can feel like a chore or just doesn't fit with the vibe of the game. But that is not the case here at all. And along with that, there's really great enemy variety throughout. We have the lying figures that shoot out acid, the mannequins who will act like a mannequin. Some mannequins crawl around, they can dodge your attacks. I actually hate the mannequins so much, to be honest. There's nothing wrong with them, but they were the most annoying thing to fight, dodging my swings, and I didn't want to waste my ammo on them. It was terrible. You also have the nurses and the ones that crawl on the ground really fast. Overall, the enemies and bosses were surprisingly solid and good in some aspects. Along with the gameplay elements in terms of fighting, another big part of the gameplay loop are the puzzles. This is basically what you're spending the entire game doing, and I overall enjoy them. I really do like the puzzles, and the course of actions you have to take to get them are good. I don't think any of them were too difficult, but sometimes I just got a bit confused on where to go next and what to do. The only possible downside of them to me is that, well, it's really the only thing that you do the entire game. Like, this was a lot more puzzle focused than I was expecting it to be, but in all honesty, there wasn't really anything else I would have wanted it replaced with, and thought the puzzles fit pretty well with the style of game, and even some of them had symbolism, which is fun to look back on. And something else that is really done well in this game is the level design. Each location you go to feels unique and brand new, and even though most of the puzzles are somewhat similar in the sense you go around this building finding clues, it still feels fresh and not overused. Like, one portion that I remember loving was when you had to drop all your items and go through a section with nothing. That switched things up so much because you really had to stealth around and avoid everything. The level design is an underrated aspect to this game in my opinion, as there is such a variety in locations and things to do. Overall, the gameplay here is exactly what it needs to be, and I think that is perfect. I will never sit here and tell people that the gameplay is some selling point to Silent Hill 2 at all, but it fits like a glove when you put together all the other great aspects that this game has to offer. And another great aspect to this game, and the last thing I'll be speaking on in this video, is the story and narrative. Heading into my playthrough of this, I had high expectations for the narrative at play here, as I heard it was one of the best in gaming. And well, it's not one of my personal favorite stories, but I can sit here and say with a straight face that it's not unbelievably done and explores themes in some of the best ways I've ever seen done before. Now, if you're expecting some super deep 6-hour analysis on every line uttered in this game, you are sadly in the wrong place, as I could never analyze this game to the degree that other YouTubers have done, as they dive into this game brilliantly. But I still have a good amount to say and will try my best to dive into some of the deeper aspects. To give a summary of the plot and what's going down here, we have our protagonist James Sunderland. He arrives in the town of Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his deceased wife Mary. She has been dead for 3 years due to an illness, but for some reason James thinks she might be alive. Already leaning towards the point that James might not be right in the head. And for some reason the horror games I have played up to this point always gotta do with some dude looking for his dead loved one. I still eat it up every time though, to be honest. So that's basically what this entire game is about. We explore the mental state that James is in throughout this journey of him trying to find his deceased wife. The narrative that is told here is impeccable, and I really do think is the definition of a show not tell story. Because for most of this game, I was left so utterly confused of what was even going on. Since they don't really tell you much. What is Silent Hill? What are these creatures? Who are these other characters? It is left to interpretation for most of your playthrough, and some of it still at the end remains up for debate and for theories. Especially towards the end of things for me, before the big reveals, I was like, are we even looking for his wife at this point? It just feels like we're mentally torturing ourselves more and more. But once everything is concluded, it wraps together beautifully and you look back on the game in such a different way once you have a lot more of the pieces of the narrative available to you. It is handled brilliantly, and I like how they left so much of the game ambiguous throughout. When you look back on things, you notice how the fog, different enemies, the pyramid heads, all have their different symbolism and correlation to James's psyche. It's storytelling to near perfection, having the ability to so subtly tie in all these different pieces and plot points without sometimes ever even mentioning it at all explicitly. Even people like Eddie and Angela, their correlation to Silent Hill is never explicitly stated, but by the end of their arcs, you can start to piece together how they experience their own version of Silent Hill. It's funny because for most of the playthrough, you're by yourself, so the characters never feel like too much of a focal point, but they're some of the most important pieces to this whole story. I've already touched on Eddie and Angela, but another very important character that we have is Laura. Probably the biggest aspect to her in my opinion is the fact that she does not see anything that we, Angela, or Eddie see. She is completely unaffected by the horrors of Silent Hill. She has no regrets, no guilt. She has a clean conscience. She's also used as this very interesting bridge of sorts to connect her between us and Mary, as she knew Mary, and it gives us a unique view on her from a different perspective than how James sees her. Laura is also one of the key aspects to James's revelation and clearing of his conscience to face the reality of things. She connects together the fact that it hasn't been 3 years since Mary died, but more like a few days. How James is so out of control mentally that he has completely fabricated the time and events that actually happened in real life. I also really like her voice acting here, as I really do think it is brilliant. Along with every character, there's that slight feeling that it doesn't feel real, but never enough to make you totally question it. Everyone is just that slight bit off-putting, slightly uncanny, and it adds an extra layer to the world and storytelling that one might not notice throughout a first playthrough. The other character that affects James the most throughout this playthrough, well definitely the most, is Maria. Maria is such an interesting character and one I held so many different emotions towards throughout the entire game. Firstly, I did not like her. She felt very off-putting, over-sexual, especially in the environment that we were in, it just felt wrong. But obviously, post-playing it, that's exactly how she was meant to be. She was supposed to be playing and poking with James's mental and emotional state throughout and was supposed to represent his guilt, sexual frustration, and longing for Mary. She was meant to be this representation of the quote-unquote perfect Mary. She's more flirtatious, she isn't sick, she's more affectionate. She's also not real, as she is completely a manifestation of James's subconscious. Everything that she represents is because of the mental state that James is in. And one other thing that tripped me out so much about her was how she kept dying over and over and kept coming back. But this pushes James to remember the death of his wife and how it actually happened. The repetition of Mary dying symbolizes a suppressed memory of him taking out Mary and forces him to confront his past and the truth. Every time she died and came back had me questioning if anything we had experienced to this point was even real. All of these characters tie into and affect our protagonist of the story, James Sunderland. He is not your typical protagonist. A lot of the time when you think of a protagonist, you think of a good guy, a hero. Even if they're not fully good, they get some type of redemption at some point. But for James, he just continues to spiral down this darker and darker path, and by the end, once everything is revealed, is very much a flawed and tragic character. James very much represents the dark side of a human, the sins they can commit and how he has to face them. And I loved it because I love flawed characters and find them so much more intriguing. I also really like how James is an unreliable source. We play this game through his lens and it's just slowly unraveled that James was not okay mentally and everything he thought was true wasn't, as he suppressed the truth. What truly happened was that James murdered his wife, and it wasn't 3 years ago, it was a few days. He took a pillow and suffocated her. He was frustrated, emotionally exhausted, and was tired of her, so he took her out. The emotional strain of her sickness he could not handle anymore, and he grew extremely resentful of his wife and no longer wanted her alive. The reveal of this is tragic and horrifying to learn about, but he was unable to accept his actions, so he created this false reality in his mind. His journey throughout all of Silent Hill 2 is to confront this past and truth that he is hiding from, but he isn't even aware that this is happening. Through the manifestations of this town, the walls that James built in his mind slowly break down until he is faced with the truth when he watches the video of him suffocating Mary. Everything that happened in Silent Hill built to this moment, and it is beautifully done. The player is left shocked, not knowing what's going to happen next, and it's such a well-crafted scene. All of these events build up into the ending of this game, and There are a lot of different ones, surprisingly. For a game that is very linear without much player choice, there's a lot of different ways this game can end. We have the Leave ending, Remake in the Water, the Maria ending, Stillness, Rebirth, Bliss, and then the more troll ones with the UFO and dog ending. To get these endings, there are so many intricate and small things that you have to do to get them, it's crazy. The ending that I got was the Leave one, which was surprisingly a lot happier than I was expecting the game to end. Overall, the narrative is some of the best storytelling I've seen from a video game. Even if personally it didn't extremely resonate with me or connect to me, I can't deny that the story is impeccable from start to finish, and the way they structure things I've rarely ever seen done this well in a video game. I had high expectations for this narrative, and they were definitely met. Silent Hill 2 is one of those games where I go in with high expectations and have them met. It's one of the best feelings out there. I came into this expecting my mind to be messed with, to be scared, immersed, and I was in every imaginable way. I loved every second that I played of this remake and thought it was unbelievable. The atmosphere and storytelling are just some of the best out there in any video game. Even 24 years later, this story still hits. The themes aren't outdated and it was an amazing experience. Bloober Team knocked this remake out of the park and delivered us a modern remake of arguably the greatest horror game of all time. My final rating of Silent Hill 2 is a 9 out of 10. The story was fantastic and I loved every second of it. If you guys made it to the end of this video, thank you guys so much for watching. Your support means the absolute world to me. If you guys did enjoy this video, it would mean a lot if you could like, comment, and subscribe, as we are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. Again, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Your support means the absolute world to me. I will see you guys in the next video, and God bless.